Stephen had no idea what kind of watch could be below the thick layer of dried mud and dirt, but he had very high hopes. If this was an old Rolex, it could make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. And so he had it cleaned so that a jeweler could have a look at it. But he received some very unexpected news from that jeweler about the watch. The jeweler had been looking at the watch in complete silence for nearly a minute now. Stephen could barely contain his nerves and excitement. So much was riding on this. But when he noticed the look on the jeweler's face, Stephen quickly started to lose hope. The jeweler was stuttering, trying to give Stephen an answer. Stephen thought that he probably did not have the heart to tell him that the watch was worthless, as he knew he had already put good money into restoring it. But the jeweler actually ended up saying that he knew this watch. It might now be from a big-name luxury brand, but this was a very special watch. A watch with a story that made Stephen's jaw drop to the floor. But what exactly was this watch? Where did it come from? And how did it end up buried in Stephen's garden for years? But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. Stephen never expected to find anything when he was digging up his garden that afternoon, let alone an old watch. It was a find by complete accident, and at first Stephen did not even think much of it, but that was quickly going to change. He was very sure that it was not one of his own, as he had never lost a watch as far as he knew. They had also only lived here for a couple of years, and judging by the state of the watch, it had been here much longer than that. After about an hour of trying to continue in the garden, Stephen's curiosity got the better of him. He put down his shovel and went to give the watch a better look, but there was not much to see yet. The watch was completely covered in a hardened layer of mud and dirt. Stephen's first instinct was to rinse that watch under the faucet so that he could maybe uncover a brand or something else identifiable. But when he told his wife about that idea, she immediately stopped him in his track. She had never heard anything that stupid before. This could potentially be a very old and maybe valuable watch. Anything they would do could damage it even further and maybe even make it worthless. Stephen needed to find a professional cleaner to do this otherwise. He might as well throw it in the trash now. Stephen decided to call his local jeweler to ask for advice, and the man who was answering the phone actually had an address he could go to for help. Stephen felt really excited as he could finally uncover the true value of the watch. He just felt that was something big. But the thing was that this service was not going to be cheap. Carefully cleaning a watch was not easy, especially if it was in the state that Stephen was describing. And the jeweler already mentioned that these kind of things definitely won't be cheap. Stephen had to decide if it was worth the gamble to have this watch restored. He had no idea if this was worthless or worth $1 million or even more, or if there was something else going on with this watch, because he sensed that this watch wasn't just a watch. Stephen talked it over with his wife, and they both came to the conclusion that it was worth the risk. This watch could potentially set them up for retirement, and in best case scenario, they could give some of their money to their beloved grandchildren. Stephen called to confirm an appointment with the cleaner for that afternoon, and hopefully he would have the watch back as good as new in 2 days' time. So Stephen drove to the cleaner, which took him 30 minutes, and after entering the store and presenting the watch, the cleaner looked very surprised. The cleaner looked almost shocked when Stephen presented the watch to him. He had not seen many in this terrible condition. All he could hope for was that there was still something salvageable under all that dirt. And to everybody's relief, there actually was. The dirt was not easy to get off, but when it did, it revealed that the watch below it was still looking quite decent. But it was not about the watch itself, but there was something more about it. All that was completely broken was the glass cover and some of the finer mechanics inside. But those were relatively cheaply replaced, as they were really common compartments. Stephen had hoped that the cleaner would find a brand of the watch or maybe recognize the model so that he could estimate its value. He was been praying that he would find that it was a Rolex or something, but this wasn't the case. But the cleaner did not find any brand, nor had he ever seen a watch like this before. He had even been searching online a bit, but unfortunately with no result. Stephen felt quite disappointed by the results of the cleaner. But moments later, this disappointment would overturn into a whelm of excitement. When the cleaner was finally done, Stephen was left with a bit of investment in a now good-looking watch, of which he still had no idea what the value was. It didn't look good, but he had to give it a second try in order to know whether the watch has a high value or not. Watches were mostly given value by the brand, while an old watch that nobody had heard about was most likely worth pennies. Had Stephen made a big mistake by getting it restored? He was afraid to show the final product to his wife. He did not want her to be disappointed, and so he decided to first take the watch to the jeweler he had called. Stephen knew that this jeweler was really good at his job, a specialist you could say, so he would definitely know its true value. There was probably a better chance of him recognizing the watch than the cleaner. Maybe, just maybe, he could still play even on this stupid watch. That would be good for Stephen, so this stupid watch wouldn't cost him $250 to clean, and he could get some of his money back. When Stephen finally arrived at the store, it seemed completely abandoned. He wondered about the time. Perhaps the store was already closed, and quickly grabbed his phone. When he unlocked his phone, he saw a missed call from his wife. Was she simply wondering about the current situation, or did she know more? Stephen was in doubt. Should he call back his wife or inform her later about the situation? He started walking into the store and eventually entered the rear of the store, still patiently waiting for either the jeweler to return or to answer the call from his wife. A new discovery was awaiting. As Stephen was wandering around, something on the wall caught his eye. It was a picture, framed and in black and gray. Stephen tried to identify the person, but suddenly he saw a similar watch on the arm of the pictured person. Stephen is deeply shocked. How is it possible that no one can identify the watch, even though it's clearly in this picture? Stephen decides to take a picture of the framed photograph. At least that way he would have proven. Besides, he can show it to his wife, who must be worried sick by now. Stephen decides to rush home. What has he gotten himself into? Before sharing his discovery with anyone, even his wife, Stephen decides to search the internet. Not knowing where to begin, hours pass with no results. He's close to giving up when the phone rings. It's a specialist, calling for Stephen by name. Confused about how the man got his number, Stephen listens as the caller calmly asks if he'd been in the store. Stephen stays silent. The specialist then reveals he knows about the visit and the photograph Stephen took. Disturbed by this, Stephen ends the call, unsure of what to think. But the situation is already beyond his control. Trying to make sense of it all, Stephen wonders what role the mysterious watch plays in this growing puzzle. He takes a walk, trying to think clearly. Should he get rid of the watch and pretend he never had it, or keep it, hoping for some kind of reward? Lost in thought, Stephen walks briskly, unaware of his surroundings. Then a voice calls out his name. It's the specialist again. He reassures Stephen he meant no harm and invites him back to the store. Stephen agrees, seeking answers. Once there, he hands over the watch. The specialist silently compares it to the one in the framed photo. Finally, he says, "For everyone's safety, I recommend you leave the watch with me." Stephen hesitates, thinking of his wife. Since when was safety a concern? But he agrees, planning to return for it once everything is safe. Back home, Stephen shares everything with his wife. Though uncertain, they both know the watch holds value. She believes this proves the watch is special. Stephen agrees but remains cautious. Determined not to lose what they've found, Stephen calls the specialist, this time prepared with a list of demands. But someone else answers. Confused, Stephen asks for the specialist. After a pause, the man identifies himself as part of a special police force. They've taken over the store. Stephen is stunned. The officer informs him that if the watch is truly his, he'll need to prove it was found in his garden. Realizing there's no turning back, Stephen agrees, confident that evidence of the digging will back up his claim. Soon after, multiple vehicles arrive. The special forces rush into the garden, ignoring Stephen and his wife. They take soil samples and seal the area off. Stephen watches closely. Moments later, the watch arrives in a secure container. Meanwhile, officers question Stephen and his wife separately. Most of their questions focus on how long they've lived there and any changes made to the garden. What could be so important about this watch? Then come more visitors. Historical experts and journalists swarm the area. Stephen sees someone familiar. It's the specialist, now joined by a museum representative. Together they explain the truth. The watch once belonged to a dictator who died near this very area. He was wearing it when he died. The discovery is historic. Relieved, Stephen and his wife listen as the museum offers them a generous reward. Their retirement, once uncertain, now looks promising.